And that might sound a little bit weird, but there's a great example of this from The Economist. I don't know if anyone looked at this article. I think it was on the syllabus or something like that. So the Economist went around Haiti, and they surveyed people about whether they were getting aid from the Americans. And everyone said, no, 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 we're not getting aid. And they came back later and they saw all the people eating meals ready to eat from the American military. And they're like, why did you tell us that you weren't getting any aid? And it's like, well, we weren't going to keep getting aid if they thought we'd already gotten the aid, right? So obviously, if they think this is actually going to influence anything, people have totally the wrong incentives, right? OK. So if we want to take this sort of survey seriously, we need to think about the incentives that are involved, right? So let's try to think about that a little bit. So suppose that we know the net benefits of an activity B of Q, but we want to determine the socially optimal amount of the activity, and the harms of the activity are known privately by individuals, right? So the total harm is capital H of Q, which is the sum of the harms to every individual. The optimal cap would maximize the difference between the benefits and the harms. And the question is, how can we get people to tell the truth about what the harms to them are? And Mike, how could we do that?
Maybe make them, or give them a situation in which they would possibly have to pay or have to give up something in order to avoid that harm?
Yeah, that's right. Any sense of how to make that a little bit more precise?
We would try to use something to compare if they're willing to behave in one circumstance for one issue, maybe not a harm, and compare that to how they might behave to get rid of a harm in another situation.
Well, one thing you can do is you can just push it back another layer. You could say, look, there's externalities to other people when I report a certain level of harm. In particular, they don't get to do as much as they would get to otherwise do of this activity, right? So if I report a harm function, right, then that is going to cause externalities on other people, right? And if I pay the externalities of the action that I take, which is in this case reporting something, then I'm not going to want to lie, right? As long as I internalize my externalities, I'm going to want to take the action that's in society's interests, which is, in this case, presumably telling the truth, right? So the question is, what are the externalities of my reporting some h hat, say, rather than reporting 0? Does anyone want to say what those externalities would be? Yeah, Jim.
Well, I'm actually
yeah.
I feel like it depends on the mechanism design.
Yeah, I mean, so what we're going to do is whatever people report, we're going to maximize this, right? Okay. So the question is, what are the externalities of me saying a particular h hat?
I see. So you are raising the total harm to society, so you're, I mean, I guess it depends on locality and stuff, but you're basically...
Yeah, I mean, let's assume everything's nice or whatever,
so
right?
You're basically lowering Q star.
Yeah.
So that's going to, I guess...
There's going to be some Harburger triangle for everyone else from that, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah, so before I said, when I said 0, right, people maximized B of Q minus the sum of everyone else's reports, right? And let's call the socially optimal quantity in that case Q star sub negative I, because it doesn't include me. But when I report h hat, then it maximizes B of Q minus everybody else's minus mine, right? And so the externality that I have on everyone else, the maximum there is going to be Q star hat. So the externality I have on everyone else is the change in the sum of everyone else's utility from changing, from the fact that I moved from Q star sub negative I to Q star hat, right? OK. So the Vickery-Clark-Groves mechanism is the mechanism that asks people to pay exactly this. So in the mechanism, everyone reports their harm. The cap is set at Q star maximizing B of Q minus H of Q, and each individual pays the difference in the sum of everyone else's utility from the case when they would have gotten what was optimal for the sum of everyone else, minus what they get if we do what's optimal, including my action, which is always going to be worse for everyone else, right? Because we were choosing in total, because we were choosing the point that was optimal for the sum of everyone else. Yeah, James?
So we know the functional form of B for everybody in the population.
We just assume B is just
Okay,
known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it become a lot messier, I assume, if we don't know?
No, I mean, all this stuff is symmetric. So knowing B would be the, it's just, I was just thinking about it in those terms to relate it to the externality problem, but yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
So it's not clear to me that like the sum of everything that everyone's paying isn't going to be like larger than the overall.
Yeah, it could be.
Right. I mean.
In principle, sure.
These things should add up to like anything depending on the shape of these functions.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
That's a big problem with VCG. We'll talk about that in a minute.
I realize that. I've never
Yeah.
seen it.
Yeah, you've never seen the VCG mechanism before? Yeah. We'll talk lots about that. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Vishant.
Oh, I was just actually wondering, so like, doesn't this sort of run into similar problems that we had last with the previous like valuation technique?
Mhm.
Where, like, individual can still like sort of gain this depending on.
No. No, that's the, I mean, there's problems with this, but that's one thing that's not a problem. So an individual cannot game this, right? So the reason is that if an individual reports something different than their true harm, right, then because they're paying all the externalities associated with that, any gain that they get from doing that is more than offset by a payment of an externality to another person, or if it's not, then that's actually what they should be reporting. You see what I mean? Because they're paying all the externalities and everything else. They're internalizing the full effect they have on social welfare. Yeah, James?
So if everybody was reporting B and H,
Yeah?
then all of the same results still go through. Is that correct?
And importantly, individuals don't need to report even H.
Okay.
They can report anything, any statistic which goes into determining H. So like, imagine we were giving someone a survey. Look, we wouldn't want someone to actually report the value to them of, you know, the change in my pollution. We want them to report like the acid rain on their thing. And then we go through some complicated computer algorithm to determine their actual payment, because we figure out how much them having reported that affects the total social value, right? So as long as they pay the externalities of their thing, all we need to ask them for is whatever the information is that we need to make our decision, right? Because the truth will always be in their interest to report regardless. Okay. So the second thing is that the externalities that we gather, and this gets to Jim's question, are not paid back to the people who are harmed by the externalities, right? Why is that? Well, think about what we talked about in the last class about law, right? We didn't want to pay the damages necessarily back to the person who was harmed, because then they're going to do things to put themselves in harm's way so they can get payments, or at least not take enough effort to get out of harm's way. The same problem would be here. If we paid people who received the externalities for the externalities other people caused on them, then those people would take actions so as to make it look, they would want to lie, to make it look like they were bearing more externalities than they really were, to get other people's payments to go up so that they would get paid more back, right? So that would ruin the incentives of this scheme. Okay, so let me just give you the picture that corresponds to what Jim was saying. Imagine that this is the cost to you here, this is the cost to the sum of everyone else, and this is the flat marginal benefit curve, right? Then the total cost to society is here, and the cost that you cause, the externality you cause to others, is that we moved from here to here, and this is the Harburger triangle that everybody else other than you loses, right? And Jim's point was that if we sum that across individuals, the sum of all these triangles could add up in principle to sort of anything. Okay, so the most common use of the Vickery-Clark-Groves mechanism is the second price auction. And Kentaro, can you describe how the second price auction is an example of the Vickery-Clark-Groves mechanism? Or what is the second price auction, first of all? Yeah.
Okay, so every participant gets bids.
Yeah.
And those who bid the highest
Yeah.
will win the auction.
Yeah.
But he needs to pay the second highest bid.
Yeah.
And the good thing about second price auction is that it's weakly dominant to bid the truth.
Yeah, which and that comes from the fact that it's an example of the Vickery-Clark-Groves mechanism, right? And why is it an example of the Vickery-Clark-Groves mechanism?
Because the price you will pay is it's something you will not decide. It's
Well, but in particular, why? In what sense are you paying the externality that you cause?
oh, you mean? Sorry, what do you mean?
In what sense are you paying the externality that you cause, right? Because that's what we said the Vickery-Clark-Groves mechanism was that you pay the externality that results from you participating in the mechanism, right? So why is when you pay the second highest bid, why are you, in what sense are you paying the externality that you cause?
So what do you mean?
So in this, does anyone else want to try that? Chrissy, go ahead.
Because if you over-report, then, like if you report your value, then you have to pay whatever the second highest person's value is, and you win.
Exactly. So
And if you under-report, even though you valued it more, then you risk not winning, so you lose that.
yeah, but you pay the second highest person's valuation. Because if you had not bid, that would have been the person who got the object. And therefore, you're paying the externality that you caused on them by having bid. Because they're the only person who's affected. And so you're paying exactly your externality because you're paying what would have been the social value that would have arisen and now was destroyed as a result of you having bid. So that,
social value that like I've captured was the difference between second person's value and third person's value, because that's like how much he was gonna pay and minus how much he valued it, and that was the social gain of that transaction. So like
no, because that's how much value would have been. That's how much social value is created by the second person participating in the auction, but that's not how much is lost to all people other than you when you participate in the auction. Because the people other than you,
so all the second person was winning, so he was getting the value that I described.
Yeah.
And the rest of people were losing, so
they weren't getting anything.
yeah. Did they lose anything after I entered the?
No.
Only the second person. Does.
Yeah.
And he lost the value he was
yeah.
gonna pay, and minus his value. His value minus the value he's winning.
No, but the value that he ends up paying, that's just a transfer because that's going to someone else, right? That's going to like the auctioneer, right?
So you're adding that to also
Yeah.
to the
Exactly. So the total amount, yeah,
So
James.
if we did think about it that way, then you'd still end up getting the same number because it'd be the difference between
Yeah,
the second
exactly.
and the third, and then the third and the fourth, and you just add all those.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let me go through the logic that people were starting to get into. Chrissy was in particular starting to get into this about why you want to bid your true valuation, because this is just one of many examples of why you always want to tell the truth under VCG. This is just a simple illustration. So